Work that we've been doing on a statewide basis to make some of this possible. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the approach we've taken and why we've taken that approach, where we've gotten so far, basically in the last year to 18 months, and what remains undone. And there's sort of plenty of both in those two camps. So the approach we've taken here in Minnesota is a little bit different than the approach taken in some other places. And for me, the work really came out of some feasibility studies I had done actually before I joined IATP about 2 or 3 years ago, aimed at really understanding what drives school lunch. And, I think Michael Pollan has said the hardest thing he ever tried to do in his journalistic career was understand the Farm Bill. Well, if you take a look at school lunch, it's in that camp too. It is amazing how complicated it is. And it's also really misunderstood, I think, in many cases, as kind of a black box. Very few people who don't work in that field actually understand how it works. So for me, it was really critical to develop that understanding. And that led to my relationship with Jean, who at that time was the president of the Minnesota School Nutrition Association, which is the affiliation of 2,800 lunch ladies and lunch lady men, as they're affectionately known here, that are working to provide quality food to our school kids all over the state. And when we got together and said, okay, how can we move farm to school forward, we started thinking about partnering with the Minnesota School Nutrition Association. And that's a little bit different than efforts in various other places, which also have their merits, but are very much grounded in the farm side, trying to get into the schools. And my own feeling was, if the schools aren't ready to say yes when the farmer comes with that product, it's pretty hard for farmers to get in the door. So what we need to do is really solidify our base in the cafeteria with the food service professionals, help them get ready to do this, to have that kind of capacity to say yes, and then build that and then start working with the farmers. So we started off working with Minnesota School Nutrition Association. We formed a task force under Mary's leadership, which I facilitate. And we started by conducting a survey of food service directors in the state. And that was about a year ago, and it told us some very important things that have really shaped our work. For instance, we found out that at that time, a year ago, there were about 25 districts in the state who were doing some kind of farm-to-school work, some kind of local sourcing. Typically, they started with apples, because it's easy. People know it as a Minnesota product. Kids like it. It's less perishable. It's easier for schools to handle. Apples are a great start. And among the school districts that were doing some kind of farm-to-school work, we estimate that the average purchases per year were about $4,000. So a modest but non-zero number. We also asked food service directors who are interested in farm to school, why would you want to do this? What's the motivation? And the top couple of reasons we heard were a desire to support the local economy and local farmers, the desire to increase the consumption of fruits and vegetables among their students, and a desire to build community relationships. We also asked about concerns. For those of you who have nervousness about this, what keeps you from doing more with this? The chief thing we heard was, how do I find farmers? We also heard concerns about procurement regulations that govern what schools can and can't do. And we also heard some issues like you had mentioned about backdoor deliveries and how do you manage that, because the logistics are complicated. We also asked about interest, and we gave a scale, and 1 was, I never want to hear about farm to school again, and 7 was, I'm very interested. And I was amazed when 40% of the food service directors in the survey got back to us, 40%, and said they were very interested in buying direct from farmers. And more than 60% said they were very interested in buying through their distributor. And those numbers, I'll tell you, were multiples of what I would have expected, and a big difference from even 3 or 4 years ago. So we knew we had interest. People also said they needed tools. They said we need sourcing ideas, we need recipes, we need cost analyses, we need sources, in some cases, of pre-cut product, for instance, through a group like Created that can cut that product so they're not dealing always with whole food by the case. Also need support with promoting the product and educating the students so that students know the food is different that's coming across the cafeteria line. And then there's also a real need for staff training. So that input has really shaped our work that IATP is doing in partnership with MSNA. So where we've gone very quickly is Mary became president of MSNA, and she made farm to school one of the top 5 priorities of her presidency. And that's been really important because it sends the word out to schools across the state that MSNA is really behind this. And that's been a huge help. So the leadership here has been amazing. We've done a lot with food service director training, a lot of speaking engagements, a lot of awareness raising. The University of Minnesota has really stepped up to the plate. They've put together a fabulous website. The URL is in your packet for Farm to School in Minnesota that has a lot of very specific information about recipes, farmer contacts, specifications, all sorts of things aimed at food service staff. And it really tells the story of the most advanced Farm to School program I think we have in the state of Minnesota, which is out in Wilmer, which is a rural community in the western part of the state. They have a fabulous year-round Farm to School program, and that their model is really now documented on that website so that others can learn from it. We've done a lot of research into distribution and how it's possible to get local through distribution channels, often to a greater degree than you might have anticipated. We've done a lot with getting stories onto the national and local websites so that people can start to see that this is happening and that it's working. We've done a lot with things like promotions and education. And if you look back here, you'll see this new Farm to School logo. Thank you. And we developed that with a graphic designer over the summer. And it was important because, the food service directors said, look, I'm not a graphic designer. I need to communicate that I'm doing this, but I can't do this on my own, right? And they said, I'm also not a journalist. I'm not a writer. I need help being able to get this into my newsletter, to get it up on the walls, to get farmer photos. These photos back here from the State Department of Agriculture, they were instrumental in getting out to many of the farms that supply schools and other buyers and getting, face on the food. We've also had a lot of media attention. And I'm pleased to say we were actually the subject here in Minnesota of an upcoming video by the National Food Service Management Institute, which is kind of the, sort of quasi-governmental training institute for schools around the country. They sent up a video team from Mississippi to do a video on Farm to School in Minnesota because they had heard that we were doing things on a pretty broad kind of strategic level. So that'll be sent up by satellite to schools across the country in March of 2010. So we've made a lot of progress. There's a lot more that needs to be done. We believe that the number of districts doing Farm to School may actually have doubled this fall. We'll be doing a survey in January to try to determine that and find out how people's experience is going and where the gaps are, what the needs are. We need to do more with staff training. We've done a fair amount with the food service directors, of which there's one in each district. But we need to start reaching those training opportunities to staff at all levels because it really has to work for everybody in the school food service environment. So that's something we need to do more of. We also need to start working more on the farm and the supply side to help link farms with the schools and to deal with some of these infrastructure challenges that we have around aggregation, for instance, and distribution. We also need to do more, now that we've kind of solidified our base somewhat on the cafeteria side, in really figuring out how to educate kids. Because this is both about the food that's actually running across the cafeteria line, but we're not succeeding if the kids don't know this food is different. And if it doesn't introduce them to new options they may never have tried before, if they don't start learning some things about how food is grown and what's in the food that they're eating. So more on the kids' education piece, which I think includes both the cafeteria, the classroom, getting farmers into the schools, kids out to the farms, school gardens, a whole series of channels there, and then to do more with parents and that broader world, both within the school environment and beyond it. So those are some of the areas that we intend to get into in the year ahead.